Hello guys, welcome to a new video. First off, apologies if there is any bad quality audio in this. My pop filter has just broken, so I apologise. I'm going to try and get a new one as soon as possible. But yeah, this is just a chilled little real-time line art video where I'm going to be showing you the process on an illustration in the actual time that I spent working on it instead of being sped up to like 25 or 30 times the normal speed, which is what I usually do. I wasn't sure what to do with this recording. I was going to make it a full illustration video and then I just only recorded this bit, and then I asked on YouTube if anyone would like me to discuss anything while I play it, and a few people had some really good suggestions, so thank you. I did make a full line art tips and tricks video a while back which has passed the 170,000 views mark, so I'm absolutely floored by that. I can't believe that, and I think that's what's bringing most people to my channel, so hello if you arrived from that video. Hello also to that really loud bus that just went past. So I hope you're enjoying your stay, and hopefully you'll find the rest of my videos useful as well. So as always, let me know if you have anything else you would like to see from me or anything you'd like advice on. So yeah, there are some things I feel like I could have covered better in the line art video that I did before, but there's always going to be things I feel like I missed out regardless of what I do. I think that's the case with everything. So I'll try and expand a little bit more on some of those points here. The drawing that I'm working on is from a sketch of Saphiralu's Druidzilla, who is from our D&D campaign Glitter Chaos. I will talk more about them in the future. I've also had more requests to talk about them, so thank you. It's really nice that you're so interested. And we are working on lots of stuff behind the scenes, so please stay tuned for that. I'm really excited, and I love our party, so I'm always happy to talk about them more. I drew this in Paint Tool Sai 2, which is the latest release. The good thing about Sai is once you've paid for the first one, you get the second one for free, so I think that's really great. Generally, Sai is my favourite program to use since I find it so intuitive and lightweight, with enough tools to create a full illustration without having so many as to be overwhelming, which can be easily done with digital art software. You can sometimes find that there's just so many buttons, you get overwhelmed before you start and you just think, I don't know, and you just give up, which can happen when you're trying something new. So that's why I really like Sai. It's just simple and intuitive. I do like Clip Studio, especially the inking tools, but I am a terrible person for sticking with what I know, and so I haven't made the leap yet. I've been using it for my comic, but not for my illustrations. So I like the line art tools, but I haven't got the hang of the colouring tools yet. I'm also using a Wacom Cintiq 22 HD drawing tablet for this. I will be reviewing this tablet very soon. I've got the review in progress. I've been using screen tablets for several years, and they're what I find the most comfortable to use, and they help me to speed up my process. There's been a lot of talk about screen tablets lately. I wouldn't quite say controversy, but yeah, there's been some kind of heated debates going on around Twitter and so on about screen tablets and about art supplies for digital work that are quite a high upfront expense, and I can totally understand that because Wacom have brought out a new Cintiq which they call entry level, which is still something like £600–700, and that's not really entry level by anyone's standards. And so I think a lot of younger artists or newer artists might start to think that's what they need in order to create artwork that is at the level of the artist that they look up to. But you don't actually need these supplies. It's about what's most comfortable for you, so don't become convinced by what other people are using. With traditional media, your medium can matter because in terms of light fastness, if you're selling your work, you can't really use beginner's supplies because you need that product to be able to last. But with digital art, no one knows what you made that drawing with, and you could have made it with a tablet that cost £20 and a free art program and a laptop that you got on eBay, which is almost what I used for my Galmon review. It was a £40 tablet and my laptop, which is 7 years old, off of eBay, and I can create artwork that is pretty much the same standard as what I create on the Cintiq. It's just less comfortable for me. And so it's about finding what works for you and not what works for everyone else, and sometimes that can take some experimentation. It's hard because you want to be able to try the stuff out, and sometimes the only places you can try these kinds of tablets are in conventions that cost a lot of money to attend and things like that, so it is quite difficult. But you definitely don't need something like this to create the artwork that you want. It's just, for me, a screen tablet helps with my precision and my speed of working, and it's just what's comfortable for me. And I know a lot of people aren't comfortable with this. I use a screen tablet that's almost vertical in position. That's how I find it most comfortable to draw. Some people hate that, but it's not something that you need to create line art of high quality or anything else of a high quality. It's just what works for you. This drawing, like all of my art made in Sy, was made with a custom brush that I made by editing the pencil tool, and this is the only custom brush that I use pretty much in any software because I often get asked what brushes I use, and my answer is really boring. I just use the default brushes because I hate fiddling with brush settings, because then I just find I spend more time doing it than I spend drawing, and there's just no point in that. Also, I don't know if it's changed since the first version because I haven't even tried it, but importing custom brushes that you've got elsewhere into Sy can be quite a difficult process, or not really difficult, just a bit of a nuisance, and so I just made this by editing an existing tool and then saving it as a new preset, and I can put my settings on the screen for you right now if you would like to see what I used, and then you can create exactly the same brush. And this is basically just me being really picky, because in my first version of Paint Tool Sy, I have no idea where this tool came from. It still remains a mystery, but I had a tool called the ink pen, which nobody else had. And I had the legitimate version, and I have no idea where this tool came from. And yeah, it was called the ink pen. I really loved it, and then when I upgraded I lost that tool, and so I was determined to replicate it, and so I made this, which is as close as I could get it, and I really like using it because it just fits the way that I work. And I have the stabilizer on S1, which, like I've mentioned, I have a bit of a tremor in my hand, and just I'm used to using stabilizers now to get a smooth effect in my line art. And the good thing about Sy 2 is that you can save your brush presets with a particular stabilizer setting. So I can have the ink pen set to S1, and then my pencil, when I go back to that to colour something or whatever, that's set to 0. So that works really well for my process and helps to speed it up. For anyone who doesn't know what a stabilizer is, it's basically a tool that slows down your line in a way to make it smoother, and it's hard to explain. It's something you really need to use to figure out, and I've said that before, but it really is. It's really difficult to explain it. You just have to practice it, and it is a tool that takes work to get the hang of using. It's not something that magically fixes your lines and makes them perfect. It is a tool, and you have to take the time with that learning curve to get used to using it. And I use it because I like the effect of really smooth lines. That's what I think works with my artwork, but for other people, wobbly lines work with their style. And to be honest, I envy them a little bit because I just don't think they work with mine. I think it just makes it look like I was being lazy and I didn't finish it. But yeah, again, completely up to you whether that works for your style or your working methods or not. Now, a couple of the questions that I had were about line weight, and when it's appropriate to make your lines thick and when it's appropriate to make them thin. And what I say when I work is that your highlights and shading begin with your lines. So for some people this might not be true. They might build all the shadows and highlights into their colour layer and their lines are pretty much all the same width, and that works with their style. But for me, I like to start with my shading right from the line art stage, because my line art remains an important part of the process. I don't blend my lines into my colouring. They remain a very bold part of the illustration right up until when it's done. It's also a difficult balance, especially when you're just learning to use a tablet, to get your line widths and weight the way that works best. So it can be really easy to fall into a trap of having a really high line variation in your work, which sounds good, but in practice, if you have a lot of lines that go very thick in the middle and thinner towards the ends, it can disrupt the balance of your artwork, which is one of the people who has asked me this question has said, is that they feel that their balance of their work is ruined by having line art that is too thick. And I would say that you need to consider your light source from when you're doing your lines, and then which areas are going to be in the deepest shadow. And in addition to that, which areas you want to emphasise the most. So the first part is kind of about logic and practicality, and the second part is just about the mood you want your image to have, and kind of goes off realism at that point. It's not quite as obvious in this piece as some of my others, but I was kind of picturing the light source from the top, and so the lines at the top are slightly thinner than the ones underneath areas that would have shadow. So I always tend to add a shadow under the chin. That might be a solid black shadow, or I might shade with lines, as you can see here. I tend to add depth under the nose, under the armpit, and in the creases of the arms and the clavicles and areas like that, where you'll generally just find shadows forming where the light won't reach. Sometimes it can be worth actually breaking up your line, which is an effect that I like to do. Now this is going to be a problem if you are flatting with the selection tool, because obviously you're going to go over the edge, but I tend to manually flat now just because half the time the selection tool is just like what are you even doing, and doesn't get my lines anyway. So I tend to manually flat anyway, so it doesn't make a difference to me. But I sometimes like to go back in and just erase a few sections of my line and give it a sort of dotted or dashed effect to break up the image and give the effect of light shining on that particular area. And this is kind of an idea that I learned from reading manga a long time ago, and have kind of figured out what they were actually doing with that method, which at the time I wasn't really considering what the intention was, whereas now I look back at it and I'm like, oh okay, yeah, that indicates that there is light shining on that area, and then I integrate that into my own work. And then the next part is about stylization. So this is the part where we kind of go off of logic, and there's a quote, and I cannot remember which artist it was by, and it really annoys me, but it says, "I prefer attitude to realism in artwork," and this is very much my attitude as well. So this isn't me saying nothing has to ever make sense, ever, because things have to have a grounding in reality to allow for suspension of disbelief in the viewer, but there's a point where I get to in the drawing where I kind of think, well, okay, I'm done with logic now, I'm just gonna do what looks best. Because often what really works doesn't always look best for a drawing, especially if you work in a cartoon style or whatever. So after I'm done with figuring out what areas would have the shadow in based on the light source and the logic of it, I then go back in and put in bold lines in the areas I want to emphasize. So usually that's around the facial features. I draw very bold lines around the eyes, the mouth, the underside of the nose, the insides of the ears, and then if there's any particular movement on the character, like if there's flowing lines on the clothes or in the hair, if there's motion I want to draw attention to, I will go in and thicken up the line art in those particular areas and draw contrast, because one of the most important things in artwork is contrast. You want the areas with the focal point of the image to draw the viewer's eye with contrast. So like I said in my longer line art video, I tend to go with less line variation and depth on the outside edges of the image, or the areas that I don't particularly want the viewer to look at as much, and I will put more variation into the center or the character's face or whatever is happening that I want them to look at. And quite often I will look back at my line art and be like, no, 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 that is too heavy, what is happening here? And I will go back in and erase the excess. And putting the stabilizer onto your eraser tool can actually work really well in smoothing out details so it doesn't look too messy and reducing the width of your line art. So I'd kind of say, as an overall rule, if you're not confident about line weight, to go over your image with thin lines to begin with, not think about line depth, and just use very thin strokes, and then look at it and consider which areas you want to draw the viewer's eye to, and then go back in and build those up, because it's easier than taking things back out. So that's the way I'd probably advise if you're just getting the hang of this, and it's one of those things you kind of learn intuitively what works with your style. Another question I got was about making long and smooth lines instead of short and sketchy ones, and I would say the main thing here is repetition and practice, because that's literally how I got my lines to be the way they are now. Probably not the answer you want to hear, but that's basically the key to it. I would say that varying the speed that you draw can help you, and sometimes if you're really struggling and you really need a long and smooth line like hair, what I tend to do is put the stabilizer really high and then draw it out with a curved line. Work with the curve of your drawing hand as well while I think about that, because the way you draw, I'm left-handed, so my drawing arch naturally goes in a sort of half circle to the right. I'm demonstrating with my hand, but you can't see it, so there's no point. But yeah, the good thing about being able to flip and rotate your image as much as you want in digital art is that you can change it to the angle that works best for you. And so if you're struggling with a particular line or a particular angle, just flip that drawing until it's working with your drawing arch and not against you. So with hair, I'll often put the stabilizer up really high, which will really slow down my stroke, and then I will just try to make the longest line I can without breaking it with my drawing arch. And then if it overlaps onto something else, that's fine, because I tend to break up my line art into several layers anyway, and then that reduces the worry of any overlap. Because the worst thing is when you've drawn a really nice line and it overlaps something else, you've got to try and erase around it, and then it's just not the same as it was before. You can tell where you erased it. So that's the reason I have separate layers, because I also had some questions about why I separate my line art into layers, and it's literally just because I'm messy. It's because I'm messy as heck, and I overlap everything and draw all over the place, and then it just means I can erase the bits that kind of crossed over and make it all neat and tidy again. So yeah, also as well as working with your drawing angle, the drawing speed can affect your lines and the stabilizer that you're using. So often if you try to draw really slowly, it will make your lines come out wobbly and more unsteady. And so you've just got to kind of be confident. I think being confident is a big part of line art, which sounds a bit strange, but that's how it works for me, is that you've got to commit to those lines instead of the short scratchy lines, which to me indicate that you're nervous because you haven't committed yourself to that decision. You're like, oh, I'm not sure what I'm doing with this, I'm just going to draw a lot of little lines and then I'm not kind of committing to anything. You just gotta be bold, and I freely admit, you can still see in my videos where I've been like, I'm not actually sure where this line is going, I'm just going to draw some scratchy lines and then join them up into one big bold line at the end. And it's just about committing and being bold and seeing that line through right until the end, because the important thing is not to break your lines, because I think you can always tell, which again goes back to why I use multiple layers for my lines, is because if you've broken up a line, you can see where you broke it. It's often quite hard to fix it and get that flow back into that line. If you're using a vertical tablet like mine, it often helps to kind of brace your hand and your arm against the surface of the tablet, so you've got a kind of more of a foundation to work with instead of your hand just floating around, because then that will make your line more wobbly. But generally I think repetition, practice and consistency is the key, and having confidence in your work as well. Another thing I've been asked is how to portray the strands of the hair and the weight of the hair, and I would say the key thing here is to separate it into sections and block it out and then focus on the strands. So when you look at a hairstyle, don't think of all the individual strands, because that will just overwhelm your brain. And this is a mistake that I used to make with my artwork, was I would try to draw every single strand. Please don't do that, you will go insane. So basically look at a hairstyle and think of the key shapes that you can then break that up into. And they might look ridiculous when you sketch them out like that, but they won't look like that afterwards. So you just have to focus on these big, bold shapes, getting those down, then you've got the key for the rest of the image. And then you can separate those into strands. And this depends on your style, whether you like to draw in lots of individual strands or you tend to leave the hair looking kind of in big clumps, which is what I tend to do. So for me, for example here in this picture, you can see that the way her hair falls, it looks very heavy, and it almost looks like fabric in a way. So I've kind of drawn her hair like a curtain going over her shoulder, and I do take inspiration from fabric for drawing hair, which kind of sounds like it shouldn't work, but I mean, I found that it works for me. So I study real hair and I look at the weight of it falling over the shoulders, and it doesn't look as heavy as this on actual people, but this is a cartoon, so it's fine, we can emphasize and exaggerate to suit what we want to portray. So it's got to have a basis in something that makes sense, but then you can exaggerate that to what works for you. So you can see that the hair in front of her right ear is folding back over her shoulder. So I've drawn excess lines in there to portray the strands folding over each other and the multiple layers of the hair that are building in that section, and then that kind of builds contrast and leads the viewer's eye towards the neck and the face area. And that's the area I want to focus on in this image, is her face, her hand and the flower. So in between, that strand of hair kind of flows in between them and draws them together. The other side is less detailed. This is both because I don't want to draw as much attention to it, and also because it's just falling straight down. It's not really doing anything, but I don't want it to be boring. So I haven't drawn it in completely straight lines, because that's not what hair does. It's still got a little bit of overlap where it's just folding over her shoulder and chest, but it's not got as much detail and strands drawn into it because it's not doing as much. So the key is to think about what the hair is doing and how much you want the viewer to notice that bit of hair. Typically I tend to add less detail onto the crown of the head, and then I add more in towards the ends to emphasize the motion. And this is a great way to add dynamism? Dynamism? Is that a word? We're going with it. That's a great way to add movement to your image, is to make the hair move, which is something that I tend to use way too much. So yeah, when it comes to hair, I think it's the same principle as when you're drawing clothes. You don't want to draw so many folds on the clothes that you overwhelm the viewer. You want to give the image space to breathe, and you want to consider which parts you want to have empty space and which parts you want to have a higher concentration of detail to draw the viewer's eye into. And as for drawing the smooth strands of hair, I think, again, it's just practice, and it's literally just studying. Just look at how real hair works and think, how can I simplify this and how can I break it up and adapt it into my style without overdoing the detail. And I may do another tutorial on hair because I don't think my other one was comprehensive enough, but hopefully that helps you a little bit. So yeah, I'll try and work more on that later on, I think. So the last question was about colour and about integrating line work into your image. And this is one of the last stages for me, is just getting all the image to work cohesively together. And so what I tend to do is just pick a darker shade of each local colour of the illustration and then adapt that into my line art with a low opacity airbrush. And then I kind of just go through it working on what I want to emphasise again. And so, for example, on the facial features, I don't tend to do this as much. I tend to leave the line art quite dark on those. Generally, I do my lines in a very dark red instead of black because I find it less harsh on my eyes, and then I adapt each area depending on how much I want those lines to disappear into the image or how much I want them to show up against the rest of the image. And in some areas I will get to the point where the line art is almost invisible because there might be a very bright light on the character and I feel like it's appropriate to almost completely get rid of those lines in that aspect, but it's something that tends to not be as relevant to my art style as to other people's, I feel, because my lines do remain a very bold part of the image. So I'll adapt the colour, selectively erase parts that I don't feel are needed necessarily, but I don't tend to paint over my lines. And I am actually working on some digital paintings at the moment because it's something I'm trying to learn and seeing what I can achieve with that effect, so that may be something I discuss more in the future where I've actually drawn lines and then painted over them, but it's not something that I'm an expert with, and so I don't really feel like it's my place to kind of talk on that. So I don't tend to integrate the lines per se, I just tend to adapt them to work with the rest of the image. So hopefully that helps you. I'm sorry if it didn't go into as much detail as you would like because I just didn't want to make this video too long. I know it's real-time video, but I still didn't want to make it too rambly. And I am happy to expand more on these points later on in the future, like I said, with maybe another hair tutorial or another line art video, because I'm just absolutely floored at how many people have been watching that one and finding it useful, so thank you so much for your amazing comments, I do really appreciate them. YouTube doesn't always notify me of all my comments anymore, which is sad, so sometimes I miss them, but occasionally I go back through my videos and I read them and it makes me really happy, so thank you so much. I hope this helped you. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, hope it was useful, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!